Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Best Practice interview ahead of the IR Magazine Awards Europe 2020. I'm delighted to be joined by Richard Eadie from Severn, Trent, the Head of Investor Relations and Sustainability at the UK utilities firm. Rich, so good to have you here with us. Thanks for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me. Looking forward to it.
Absolutely, and we are, of course, conducting this virtually at the moment, as are most kind of business activities in 2020. Something of a challenging year, I guess, would be to putting it mildly. I wondered if you could just briefly kind of characterize how your year in investor relations has been, and particularly how you've navigated investors through what must be a pretty troubling time for them and the company.
Yeah, absolutely. It has been a very unique situation. I guess it's a word often used for where we are right now. But it's brought some challenges, I guess, mainly in the way that we communicate and I guess what we communicate with our investors. We managed to, I guess, during the whole lockdown process, we managed to report all of our year-end results, do a year-end presentation, do a worldwide roadshow, which obviously I managed to get a lot more countries in one day than I usually would have done. I think I managed to do, two or three continents in one day at one point. So I guess it's all good for the carbon footprint of the IR teams and things like that. But yeah, I think it's been really interesting the way that we've had to communicate with investors as well. I think once after the initial kind of review of what investors are looking for, I think you kind of can settle investors down by ticking off a lot of the hygiene factors that they're really kind of keen and in tune with, I guess, around liquidity and things. It was then, I guess, quickly moving into, well, how as an organisation are you organising yourselves in order to maintain kind of continuity of business? For a utility business, obviously, we are a 24/7 business. So it was about, we were key workers. It was about making sure that we're still maintaining supply of water for the people of the Midlands. Which I think is quite important to make sure that we're still doing everything that we said we would. And then it was about, I quickly moved on again, I guess, with investors to say, well, how can you give me reassurance that you're also doing the right thing? You're doing the right thing by us, you're doing the right thing by the customers that you serve and also the people that work for you. And we went through that process and that journey quite quickly, probably in a matter of weeks. Rather than the kind of usual, kind of month iteration of that sort of stuff. So it's been fascinating to see it all unfold.
Yes, I imagine. And you've already mentioned a couple of extra elements you've had to bring into the IR program to help communicate this. Presumably online events and online meetings have become crucial. Are there any other ways that you've kind of refined how you and your team operate at the moment?
I think we've probably been a little bit more proactive in our communication, just to make sure that the communications we are putting out there are getting through and the messages are landing in the way it's intended. We've always been quite broad in terms of the method by which we communicate with people, whether that be kind of, through the website or online or, little videos and things like that. We always try to be quite creative. I guess the mix has just changed, right? We've just done a lot more on video, try to put a lot more colour in some of the newsletters that we send out to our investors and things like that, and then made sure that as much as possible, the one-to-one meetings, we've tried to make them as many as video as possible and making sure that they still have access to management. I think you can't get away from the fact that seeing somebody face-to-face like you and I are talking now, I think it still helps versus a conference call to actually see the whites of people's eyes, I think, and gauge their reaction. And I think investors get comfort from that, even if some of them were slightly nervous about lockdown here and things like that. So it's all been good. It's been good.
And seeing into people's living rooms as well is always quite revealing, or
fascinating.
What their family and pets get up to behind the scenes.
Absolutely, yeah.
Just to come back to something you said about relaying information about not only that you provide a pretty vital service for your customers in the Midlands, but also keeping employees safe. And I imagine a lot of these factors are things that investors are going to be keeping in mind. Is it something, if you wanted to categorize them under the social banner of ESG, for example, is that something that they're taking more of a hard line, more of an interest in at the moment, perhaps?
Yeah, I think it was, obviously out of adversity, there was a much needed conversation that's been brought forward around the societal impact of what businesses do, not just the environmental impact,
Mm.
I think in ESG, even at the moment, I think the environment side, net zero carbon, renewable energy, those sorts of things still dominate those discussions with investors, because it's a proxy for risk as much as anything, and an opportunity, I guess. But the societal impact has really shone through in COVID, and it really brings home just kind of how delicately balanced society is when it comes to something like this, which cuts right through every industry, every socio-economic class, and the impact that businesses can have is really profound, I think. We were quite quick, I think, to recognise kind of our various different stakeholder groups from a societal perspective, and made sure that we felt like we were doing the right thing by all of those groups, whether that be for our customers, making sure that they knew that there was, I guess, help and support for them to pay for their water bill, and that we weren't going to be kind of aggressively chasing after income and things like that at the time. With our suppliers, it was bringing forward payment terms for kind of our smaller and medium-sized suppliers, so they had the lifeline that they needed in order to keep their cash flow and liquidity going, because I guess without your suppliers, you really struggle as an organisation, and you are really kind of one big kind of ecosystem, I guess. And we also made sure that we kept the work coming as well. As a utility, we continued to invest in infrastructure during lockdown, so that those businesses that rely on us, because we're a large employer and a large kind of spender within the Midlands region, that they could benefit. And then people-wise, health and safety is obviously paramount to us, and half of our workforce transitioned to work from home within a week. But there were another sort of 3,000 employees that are being asked to be out and about, in the regions during lockdown, to make sure that water flows and waste gets taken away safely. So, health and safety was paramount for those guys as well. And there were a board of things that we needed to do as well, like settle people down around kind of their own personal economic situations, and making commitments that said, well, no redundancies would be made off the back of COVID. We did that within the first couple of weeks, because, regardless of what's going on in a company's kind of situation, then there's broader family and partners and peers that you've really got to worry about. So we did that. And we also locked in a 3-year pay increase deal as well. We brought forward those discussions to say, okay, well, we'll honour the bonus, we'll make sure that everyone has a job, and we'll also, by the way, here's clarity over the next 3 years of a pay increase that you're going to get each year for the next 3 years. And those sorts of things were really well received by kind of our employees, because they kind of said, right, okay, I can just concentrate on A, doing my job, and B, looking after my family now. I don't have to worry about kind of the broader economic stuff. So I think it helped us to maintain, I guess, stay on the front foot with regards to what we wanted to achieve during the lockdown period. And it was, I think, employees really look to you for leadership in these moments, and I think that's where we seem to do okay, I think.
I'm glad to hear, and it sounds like a great recognition of I think it's one of the things we've heard from several companies, the recognizing the role of companies as employers with many different stakeholders at a time like that. So I'm sure it's been well received, as you say. Just to cast our minds back then to back in a time when we could still do in-person events, and we were very keen to ask you, Rich, and the team at Severn Trent, about the annual investor event. I think in 2019, I can't remember the month. It was summer 2019.
It was early 2020. It was actually only a couple of weeks before lockdown, would you believe? Yeah, it feels like a very, very different world. Yeah,
that's why it felt like I had to compartmentalize it into last year.
Exactly. Yeah. So seems like an age ago.
But it received a lot of attention. We heard here, a lot of investors were really impressed with it, and a lot of it is available to view on your website, I think. But there were some innovative choices, getting business leaders in front of investors in kind of almost speed sessions. A couple of other things. I wonder if you could just take us through what some of the thinking behind that was, and some of the things you were really keen to achieve.
Yeah, sure.
And then just comment on what feedback from investors has been like too.
Yeah, sure. So it was a sustainability-led, excuse me, it was a sustainability-led capital markets day. And we hadn't done one before. Obviously, you do kind of the boilerplate capital markets days where you talk about strategy in the future, but we wanted to do something different because we felt like we had quite a lot to say in this space, and we wanted to really dedicate some time and focus to it. So we had about 100 investors and broader stakeholders come and join us at our head office in Coventry. And it wasn't just about investors, I guess. It was about kind of non-government organisations. It was about kind of some of the charities that we work with, local organisations. So they understood what we were really about. It was quite unique in the fact that it wasn't particularly kind of numbers and financial forecast heavy, which I had my heart in my mouth on the morning of investors going, oh, they're all getting on a train from London, and I'm going to give them no PowerPoint presentation and no numbers and nothing that they can put into their models. How are they going to receive this? But it turned out brilliantly. So we converted our office into lots of different zones where we talked about various different things that we were doing around the environment and water scarcity, around net zero carbon and our triple carbon pledge that we've got for 2030. But we also went quite deep into kind of the people side of things and our kind of helping people to thrive kind of pillar, which is around, you know, I guess inclusivity and diversity, you know, some of the things I mentioned around COVID, around, you know, helping people that are struggling with their bills, helping people that are vulnerable in the communities and how we do that. So it was a real broad cross-section of topics that we covered, which ultimately allowed people to get under the skin of what we were as an organisation culturally, as much as kind of, you know, what you see through a presentation. So we had 60 presenters from across the organisation, and that was from Christine as the new incoming chair, to Liv, our chief executive, all the way through to apprentices that had recently joined that maybe had come from social mobility cold spots, and they were an apprentice solicitor, and they talked about, you know, how important this role was for them, and you know, and the impact that it had on them and their family. So it really brought home kind of the role that a business can play with society and the environment. It was obviously a challenge, but I think what investors really appreciated from the day is they can hear about a chief exec or a chair or a CFO banging on about the unique culture that their organisation has and how, but it's only when you truly see it in practice and you see it across a number of people and a number of areas of the business from different age groups, it's that you really start to kind of link the words with the actions, I think. And that was what really shone through, is investors really kind of started to believe our cultural kind of story and narrative around what we're all about, and hopefully fell in love with us a little bit. I think just had a little crush on us maybe by the time they left.
That's the way to do it. You're right, and a lot of that is so intangible that an event like that really is the difference between understanding it. I mean, is that something obviously hard to recreate in the current situation? Something you're looking at doing online in a similar way next year, or?
Well, we'll see about capital markets events, but actually one of the unique things we've just done, because we're quite big on, I guess, making sure that we keep the business moving. But even last week, we had the chief exec, and we do leadership events every year with our top people managers, and we had a number of works with Public Health England and the local authorities to put on some events whereby we could start talking about some of the broader issues around kind of our strategy going forward. And we did it at one of our reservoirs, and we cycled groups of people through these sessions, and it was almost a drive-in cinema for all of our people, where the chief exec, you know, stood on stage and listening to what we had to say around kind of the environment, but also what we're doing around technology, how we're changing the business, and you know, how it all fits together. So I guess we're quite reluctant to let anything get in our way when it comes to communicating. And following on from the Capital Markets Day, even, I guess, our chief exec, she usually visits every 18 months. She usually goes on a bit of a tour and visits all 6,000 employees and visits them all face to face in small groups. We quickly moved that to online because it was due to happen this summer. So she has virtually met every single member in sort of groups of 30 or 40 through a kind of facilitated kind of web-based discussion of sort of 2 hours, where they really got to understand what our sustainability story was all about as well. So yeah, I think communication of this sort of stuff has always remained kind of forefront, and we're just trying to continue to be creative about the way we do it.
Certainly sounds like it, and sounds like barely missing a step even in pretty mitigating circumstances. I mean, my question I've asked a few people is, how many of these, the changes you've had to make, do you think will stick? But it sounds like it's more in Severn Trent's situation, more of a case of just adapting what you do to work and carrying straight on.
I think so. I think when you think about the role of investor relations and the proximity you have to your investors, I think we'll just have to see how that plays out, right? In terms of face-to-face and travel and things. I think people will always be, that people are now more conscious about their carbon footprint than they've ever been before, I guess. And you don't necessarily want to unwind all of that. But we also really value the interaction that we do have on a face-to-face basis. So I'd never rule out kind of, visiting people, because, investors place a lot of money and trust in your organization, and the least that you can do probably is go and see them every now and again and give them the time that they deserve. So I think we'll always do that, but I think it has opened up more avenues, I think, to communicate better. If we can get investors used to kind of serving themselves digitally with some of the communication, you can do a lot more in terms of kind of educational videos or little snippets about what's going on. You can be more creative about your year-end results presentations. There's loads of stuff that it opens up opportunity as well, I think.
Absolutely. Well, we'll see exactly how that goes. But I'm looking forward into 2021. Gosh, it seems so far away given this year. Given that there's going to be a bit of an evolution in how these best practices pan out, do you think there's going to be a change in what the kind of hallmarks of great IR will be? Is it still going to be about the kind of, or is it going to be more about the practicalities of how you achieve those, best in class investor relations?
I think the role of investor relations is always kind of developing and changing, and I think the challenges that I see for the next year are around leadership, probably, of the investor relations function, and the role that it plays in, I guess, driving that ESG agenda out there. I think if you are an IR team that's thinking about ESG and asking investors, well, what do you want to see, and I will deliver that for you, I think you're going to struggle. I think increasingly IR and corporates need to take the lead of, this is what you as investors need to be thinking about, and it feeling quite collaborative, I think, to almost take control of your own story around sustainability and what you stand for and why it's important. But everyone's kind of feeling for that common ground at the moment of, I don't really know how to measure this stuff, help me, particularly on the societal stuff. And I think that's where IR functions can help the investment community in how to think about it, and the impact that this stuff can have on the bottom line. And that's what we've always been quite keen to do, is to press home it's an and, if you see what I mean. You can do brilliant things for society and be a business that acts responsibly and still deliver for a wide range of stakeholders, including your investors. So I think there's a leadership element to it. I think investors will be increasingly looking for authenticity, I think, coming out of an IR team. So what does your company stand for? One thing that I guess COVID and kind of the longer term impacts of COVID is probably going to do is it will root out the companies that had bolt-on strategies that were sustainability versus ones that were core and inherent to what they do. I think, under difficult times, which bits just get dropped quite quickly because it's either too difficult to get stuck into, or your business model can no longer afford to do that. Whereas those that have got sustainability, embedded in their strategy will just carry on. And it'll be interesting to see kind of, where it falls away and, you go back to old practices, and where it's really embedded in kind of long-term decision making. So I think there's an authenticity piece. And I think there'll always be this role that IR has to play as an internal agitator, I guess, for change as well. So we have this beautiful role that we get to play, which is to talk to people outside of an organization and get their view on how the business is working. But also, the investor community talk to all businesses all the time. So they're a brilliant source of insight into what's really going on in the world as well. And IR need to take all that information and then turn it on themselves internally and say, well, actually, this is what we should be shooting for, and use that information to help drive company strategy as well. And I think that internal agitator for change is is a role that IR needs to start playing, I think, in a more stronger way. So I think those are the kind of three things that I would see as an evolving challenge for IR.
I like that, an internal agitator. That's a good way of putting it, Rich. And I would hasten to suggest that if folks are interested in finding out more about how to communicate some of those sustainability issues in an interesting way, they should look to your event at Severn, Trent. But thank you so much for chatting to me today. Look, we're all looking forward to seeing each other in person, and it'd be great to see you as we can and celebrate in person.
Brilliant. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Rich.
Cheers.